Hello, everybody, and welcome to this conversation in my series of talks with some of my best buddies in the quilt world, new friends and old. Today, I am really excited to have Glenda Richardson with me. Glenda and I have known each other for a few years. We were both members of the African American Quilters of Baltimore, and I recently rejoined as a virtual member. So I'm really excited because Glenda is a wonderful art quilter, and I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So let me tell you a bit about Glenda's background, and I'll put my glasses on so I can see my notes. Glenda spent most of her adult life in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and she worked for the Library of Congress as an information specialist. Prior to that, she received a Bachelor's of Fine Art from Howard University. And I think you'll be able to really see her fine art background really coming through in her work and her conversation today. In 1995, Glenda began making collages and art quilts. Her work is a melange of pieced fabrics, found objects, buttons, beads, handmade papers, jewelry, lace, and applique, and even more. Her inspiration comes from several sources, beginning with her grandmother, who was a quilter in rural North Carolina. Her grandmother's quilts carried the family's history and kept her creative spirit alive in Glenda. Glenda's work tells a personal story whose themes have universal meaning. These themes include physical and spiritual healing, social commentary, and portraits of historical figures who have shaped her life. She is also inspired by poetry, proverbs, and truisms of varied cultures, including African American history and folkways, and the art of India and Africa. Glenda's quilts have been exhibited in numerous venues, most recently in the two-woman exhibit, Repurposeful, at Stevenson University. Her quilts were also featured at Baltimore City Hall in a show called Mindfulness, celebrating women quilter fiber artists, and in the exhibit curated by Dr. Carolyn Mazzoni called And Still We Rise, Race, Culture, and Visual Conversations, which is currently on a national tour. Her work has been exhibited at the International Quilt Festival in Houston, the International Quilt Conference, Johannesburg, South Africa, the Day Center for the Study of Contemporary African Art in Accra, Ghana, and the James E. Lewis Museum of Morgan State University. Her work is part of the permanent collection at the Benjamin Banneker Museum in Ellicott City, Maryland. And since 2017, it's been Glenda's honor to serve as the president of the African American Quilters of Baltimore. And I still consider AAQB to be my home guild. So welcome, Glenda, and thank you for joining me today. So how are you this morning? We're taping in the morning, folks. How you doing?
I'm fine. I'm caffeinated and I'm ready to go. Thank you for that fantastic introduction.
You are so welcome. It's just always such a pleasure to talk with people whose work inspires me, and that I learn from. And I can remember, I think when we met, I think it was at the Renwick, right? Many years ago.
Right. And, you're part of my quilt history.
As you are mine. So let's jump into a few questions. let's start with what attracted you to quilt making and art quilts. I mean, you have a fine arts background, so how did you get to textiles?
Well, I'm going to go back to something that was said in my introduction. My grandmother's quilts were my first recollection of ever having even seen a quilt in person. My sister and I would go to my grandmother's home in North Carolina for Thanksgiving, and sometimes we'd spend the whole summer down there. It was a place that really grounded me. And I tell you, on Thanksgiving, those quilts were a real practical necessity. She lived in a home that was, it had electricity, but it didn't have central heat. it was warmed by a couple of potbelly stoves, and the room where my sister and I slept didn't have one. So we slept under a pile of quilts and were toasty, and we felt secure in the warmth of those things. And that was my first introduction to quilts, and it stayed with me from the time I was a child until now. Um, One thing that also stayed with me was that my grandmother never wasted anything. And quilts appealed to me because you could make them from all kinds of fabrics and things that would be discarded. And the idea of making something that would have of beauty that would have probably not existed or gone to waste really also appealed to me. And that started right there in that little house. Um, Also, as I began to look at her quilts later on, as I got older, I realized that she used fabric from her clothing, from my grandfather's clothing, from anybody who would give her some scraps. And so and actually right now, I own a quilt that she made that has a shirtwaist dress fabric that I remember her, I can remember her at the clothesline with her arms up and looking at the fabric on that dress. And also there's even snippets of my grandfather's boxer shorts in there. So and I've really respected the way that a quilt could carry a family's history. So when I learned to sew actually in high school, back in those days, we took home ec. I would mix materials in my clothing that I made. Um, I was the kid that would get a standard, simple pattern and decide I was going to make the collars out of stripes and the body out of dots. And back then, that was subversive, And so all of these things, early influences, came straight from that first connection with quilts. Uh, so I think you also asked, how did I come to making art quilts? And so that is the beginning background. Sort of the next phase of my making art quilts was that I've always had an appreciation for art. I always drew, I was colored. Uh, uh, it was inside the lines, but it was different. And I made things for myself. I would make paper dolls, and then I would make the clothing for them, cut them out, that sort of thing. But once I actually learned to sew, I then went to college and as you mentioned before, I went to Howard University School of Fine Arts, where that's where I learned what I know about color and excuse me, and about composition, about line, about art history. And although, and that was something that stayed with me and piled on top of what I'd learned before. And although I took a big detour after I got my art degree, I took a big detour and I got a degree and I had a career, as was mentioned before, as an information specialist at the Congressional Research Service at Library of Congress. But all during that time, I was still making things. I made Barbie clothes for my daughter. I made hats because I used to have these big fat dreadlocks, if you can believe that. And I made hats to cover my dreadlocks. I made embellished sweatshirts with African fabric. And then you know, you wear something, somebody sees it, they want it too. I started making things for people at the Library of Congress. And what really stuck with me at that time was those applique sweatshirts and using the African fabrics. And I became aware of the fact that fabrics could be used as paints. Fabrics could be used to tell a story. I could make a picture out of these fabrics, you know. And even though I had this career that didn't have anything to do with art all the time, it's all I ever really thought about when I had a moment to think. And the making of those things led me to wanting to do something that was more expressive of my love of art. And that's how I became interested in making art quilts. In the beginning, I don't know if you want to get a word in edgewise, Carol, but you can.
I just love listening to you. But keep going.
Well, in the beginning, I thought also that I wanted to do, so just to learn about quilting and if there's any African American art quilters. And also, you know, I just want to learn about it as an homage to my grandmother, you know, where this all started. And once and with my library background, I did some research. I read about the history of art quilters, or just generally quilters, African American quilters. And then I was on a search for where were the African American art quilters.
Yeah, and I, I I had a similar search as well, and I was lucky enough to meet Barbara Piattilla, who was the founder of the African American Quilters of Baltimore, who was an amazing storyteller with her quilts. But I met her at a quilt show, and actually I shouldn't say met her. She saw me across the room and came and got me. And I said, well, I'm a quilter too, in a little voice. And she said, okay, you're coming to the guild meeting. All right, here's where we meet. See you next Saturday. She kind of scooped me up, which was wonderful. The other person I think I mentioned briefly in the bio is Dr. Carolyn
Oh,
Mazzoni,
yes.
because you're right, the quilt world years ago was convinced that there were no African-American art quilters, and that there were no African-American heirloom traditional quilters either.
Right,
There was a
right.
whole mythology about what an African-American quilt was or wasn't. And Carolyn Mazzoni was really the first person who seriously reached out, created a network, and found people like you and I, and brought
Absolutely.
us to the attention of not just the quilt world, but the fine art world as well. And I've done an interview with Carolyn. That's one of the interviews in the series. So I hope those of you who are viewing this will check that out as well.
I'll check it out. You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting that you would mention that, because that's where my history and you coincide, because I was always looking for an exhibit or some kind of event or something that would help, you know, just get me to meet some of these people. They must be out there. And one day I saw, probably in the style section of the Post, I saw an advertisement for an exhibit, Spirit of the Cloths, that was going to be at the Renwick Gallery, which is the Smithsonian's craft, quote, craft gallery. And it was African American quilters. And that was my first I was retired by then, and I thought, well, if they're having whatever events they're having, I'm going to go to all of them. It was a whole series of these talks, it was workshops, it was heaven.
It
And
was.
it was my first experience uh, attending a lecture by Dr. Mazzoni. And it just it's one of those watershed events for me. I met a number of people who are major names, and were major names at the time in quilting. I got a chance to talk to Edjanetta Miller. I took a workshop from her. I still have the little piece that I made in that workshop, and you know, it was so inspirational to me. It was really difficult even for me to make it, because I was just looking at her the whole time I was putting things down. And I actually got a chance to talk to her, and she was very encouraging. And I kept that with me. And then when I actually saw, well, before that too, as part of this event, Barbara Piattilla was there, that Carole just mentioned, and Carole Shaw. And they scooped me up and said, you have to come to our guild meetings. And so that was like 20 years, at least 20 years ago. And I started going to those guild meetings, and that really, really was in addition to all of the things that I learned through having an entree into the Women of Color Quilters Network, also the guild was a place where I could finally come out of isolation. And that having that community of quilters was what really boosted me. I feel like there's something else I wanted to say about, the exhibit that went along with Spirits of the Cloth also was just, and the catalog.
Yes.
The beautiful catalog. It just was something that was just so inspirational, and gave me the energy to keep going forward with this crazy idea that I was going to make art fabric.
I know. Make art with what? Needle and thread? What? And yes, I will be putting links to the people we mentioned, both below the video link there, and I'll run some links too across the video. So yeah, so much that you said just resonates with me. I think there is importance in artists having solitude, you know, quiet time, where they have space, time, and some sort of materials to work with, you know, where they can be alone with their thoughts and experiment and learn and so forth. And at the same time, I think it's kind of a myth that artists only work in isolation. As you know, because you've got the fine arts education, most artists work in some sort of connected community with other artists. They influence each other, they learn from each other, they challenge each other, they argue with each other, you know. But there's that exchange of ideas and feedback and encouragement that's so important for any medium that an artist is working in, whether it's music or dance or textiles in our case, painting, whatever. Uh, and 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 I think the fact that we were able to find each other before the internet.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
true.
I mean, we found each other through books and email, just email and whatever, a phone call. We actually called each other and talked to each other. We didn't live in the same cities, and we met, and we continue to meet
Mhm.
in different venues and different forums. Uh, so yeah, the community is so critical. And the African American Quilters of Baltimore uh, was interesting when Barbara started the guild, because at the time she was the only true art quilter in the group. Everyone else was making more traditional quilts, utilitarian quilts, and several members were and still are heirloom quality quilt makers, in terms of the kinds of skills that they have. So, those influences. However, the members were very open to whatever you were doing and very encouraging, and in my case, challenge me a little bit to to improve my skills, my sewing skills, because I had zero. Um, but all of that was important. But I want to talk about you and some of the sources of inspiration that you have, and then we're going to look at some of your work, because I know you've got a slideshow for us. But where has it come from through the years?
That is a good question because it comes from all over. And maybe I'll start by just telling you some of the contemporary artists that I find whose work I find inspirational. Um, there I do look at a lot of quilts. I look at a lot of quilters. I go to a lot of exhibits. I go to as many openings as I possibly can. So it's a big question when you ask me what is my inspiration. But I'll start with to contain it. I'll start with some contemporary artists and then kind of stretch out from there. But before I do that, I do want to give recognition to the African American Quilters of Baltimore. One thing that you said is that you were an art quilter or are an art quilter, but this was a place where you could learn some skills and take it in whatever direction you wanted to take it. And it's important to learn those skills. I'm a person that does a lot of improvisational work, but believe me, it is intentional. It is not accidental. And that is because I have learned some of the skills that are the basic building blocks for making a quilt. And I've combined that with my art background. And it's important to have a place where you can go try out things. Baltimore, our quilt guild, we've got a big show and tell at the end of every meeting. Everybody gets to, if they want to, show what they're working on. It could be something in progress. It could be something that's finished. But I'm here to tell you, you can, and this is what I like to say all the time, you can get up there with a sock that used to have a hole in it, and you put a patch around it, a heart, whatever, it looks good. Oh, baby. You get so much encouragement, and that can lead you to that next step to learn some more. Oh, I'm going to do more, you know. And you don't get critiqued there, you get encouraged. And that is really good for anybody at any level, but it's good for developing your confidence and developing your skills. It's a wonderful group of women, and every once in a while a man. And I'd like to give them credit for having a space to grow as a quilter and as an artist. Um, in my time there, I started out low 20 some years ago when I met Carole. In the back row, I was afraid to open my mouth. And oh, I never imagined when I met Barbara Piattilla that one day I would be holding the same office, but I'm so grateful for that meeting and so honored to represent the group. I really do feel that. I'm just very grateful.
Out of respect for copyright, we will not be showing images of the artists that Glenda will be mentioning. However, we will provide you with links to their websites. Thanks for understanding.
So anyway, that's part of my getting back to inspirations. They're big, all kinds of inspirations. But I also am inspired by some contemporary artists. One is Deborah Roberts, who does, her work is collage work. And I feel like quilting has a lot of similarities to collage. She's a painter and a collage artist, and her work is generally about the plight of the Black girl child. And it's emotional, it's impactful. And those are some of the traits that I like to have in my work, what I'm working for in my work. Another person is Delita Martin, who is a printmaker. And both of these women, they do make pieces that feature a number of people, but they really focus on the individual girl or the individual woman and what she symbolizes. And so their work has been very inspirational to me. And when I was at Howard, I majored in graphics, printmaking, and so I learned a lot of printmaking techniques there. And I have the printmaking, excuse me, resonates with me. A quilter, and you don't have to go that far, you know, about from your base to find these people too. One quilter that whose work I really enjoy is Stephen Towns. He has done a series. He's a painter also, but he's making quilts that have a historic import. And his exhibit at the Baltimore Museum of Art was very, very moving. And so he's one of my inspirations. And then
I saw that exhibit. I almost made a special trip back to Baltimore to see it. It was great.
It was fantastic. And I've had an opportunity to meet him, and he does wonderful work, but he is the nicest man too. I love it when I meet somebody who's just so nice. And I am part of a group of people, a quilt club at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And he made a special visit to come in and just kind of hang out with the Quilt Club, which I think is fantastic. And he'd done it a couple of times. He's a MICA alum, and he'd done it a couple of times. And so, but even if I didn't know him, I would love his work and consider it an inspiration. And then for the classics, we've got to talk about Faith Ringgold, the fact that she could tell those stories the way she has done with her quilts. That inspired me. And the paintings of Georgia O'Keeffe. I love, especially the ones where she hones in on an item, hones in on a flower. It takes you deep inside a flower. There was something about that that made me feel that I would like to be able to create that kind of relationship with a viewer. And so I could probably go on, but I'm just gonna say one more, Amy Sherald and her portraits. I do a lot of portrait quilts, and I don't know when was the first time I saw one of her pieces in a book, or a card. I stuck it up on my design wall, and I said, I got to find out more about her. And then lo and behold, later on, we know what happened. She's Michelle Obama's portrait artist. It's fantastic. I love her work. And
Mrs. Obama's dress is a quilt.
Yes, yes. It was designed as an homage to the Gee's Bend quilters. So, yeah, so that kind of gives you an idea of some of the influences in my work.
Okay, so we're going to be looking at some of Glenda's work. So Glenda, take it away.
Okay, these two pieces, I'm going to look at my notes for dates so I can remember, for dates and sizes.
Thank you.
These two pieces were done in 2011, and they are both collages. I had said earlier that collage art and quilt art have a connection. Neither one of these are quilts. But they are both made with fabric and paper. The one on the right features my grandmother, who started all this for me. That's my grandmother and my grandfather. That is Mimey. Her name was Mimey. That's an old-timey name. Mimey Wiggins and Cornelius Wiggins, my mother's mother and father. And so, and on the left is my great-grandmother.
Wow.
Patsy, my great-grandmother Patsy, my mother's mother's mother. So I have, feel like I've continued the tradition of holding our family history in the cloth. Mm-hmm. Both pieces feature photographic transfers onto fabric. The one on the right has fabric that was cotton photo transfer, and the dreamy looking, kind of grayish ones, silk photo transfer. And it's layered on cotton fabric, lace. I collect vintage linens for these pieces. Some of them pieces have holes in them, that adds to the character. That adds to the fact that a human being made it. And it also evokes the thought that this is a memory, this is something out of the past, but it's still a contemporary looking composition. And the one on the left shows the beginnings of my using the text in my work. Both of them actually have text. And I do that a lot. I use text so that the work is approachable. Sometimes I'm trying to get a message across, and I want to do it in a way where you can't mistake what I'm trying to say. So I use text. I'm drawn to these African proverbs because they are usually the true truth.
Yes.
And this proverb, she who tells the truth is never wrong. I've made it several ways and I can never keep it in because some woman always wants that piece, you know? So, as long as I'm alive, I'm going to be making that in various ways. So
Yes.
this is another piece that features the text on silk. The photograph was done in a different way. It wasn't photo transferred. It was an something I used to use that created an iron-on image that you could iron on. And so it's ironed directly onto this damask napkin and then sewn over fabric, contemporary, commercial, African print fabric, African style. It's not and a doily. And my grandmother used to make doilies too. So that's another. So you can create a lot of meaning with the type. That's another thing I like about working with fabric. You can create a lot of meaning with just the type of fabric that you're using.
Yeah.
And what it evokes. So and this is it's just layered as a quilt is layered. This bottom part right here is just a trim from some mud cloth. And it's all stitched. As you can see, this brown part is paper. It's stitched through, and then behind here where you see my signature, it is watercolor paper. And all these papers that I use are acid free, so that there is no problem with deterioration. And they just look cool. That heavy watercolor paper, I love it.
Yes.
So that's and these I did for myself. And I've also had commissions to do memory pieces. So here's another one. A friend of mine had he had only one photograph of his father and his mother. And they were rolled up like a toilet paper roll rolled up, you know?
Oh my goodness. Oh.
I know. So now I'm rescuing some history. So I took I flattened them out and took photographs and reprinted them onto cotton and framed them out with vintage linen, framed that out with a line of African fabric. There's this thin line of lace behind it. So we're talking about, we're sometimes people don't even realize they're getting these messages, but we're talking about their African heritage. We're talking about the time frame, and we're talking about the family history. Remember back in the day when they had those cloths on the arms of your chairs.
Yes, I do.
And I got a lot of the people give me vintage pieces, or I go to estate sales. And, every so often, when you make things and people know it, you get little gifties every so often. So.
Right.
So now he has this. It's a good friend of mine. He has this prominently displayed, and it's not rolled up in a box somewhere.
Right. So, Glenda, just a technique question. How is this piece hung or displayed?
Well, that's one good thing about these collage pieces is that they are they're sewn onto paper. You can see the sewing line. You can see the sewing line around the edge.
Right.
And that's line that sews it all down to, well, it's sewn in layers, but that
Mhm.
sews it all down to the paper backing, the
Okay.
watercolor paper, the thick paper. And it's that edging is larger than what you see in this
Mhm.
image. So there's enough to put a mat around it
Got it.
and frame it.
Mhm.
And I tell people when they frame it to tell the framer to put some spacers in between the glass and the fabric piece, because you don't want the glass smashed right on top of the fabric.
Right.
Things could grow in there.
Yes, because especially if they live in a humid climate like I do, there will be moss growing in there if there's no air circulation.
Right.
And
So
that's an
the frame,
important thing to keep in mind for preserving any kind of textile, is keeping it as
absolutely.
dry and humidity controlled as you can.
These are not collages. These are quilts. And the one on the left is entitled Living on the Edge. It's 16 inches high and 15 inches wide. And I did it in 2012. And then the one on the right, Baldwin Quoted, is I did in 2015, 24 and a half inches high and 11 inches wide. So as I said before, I like, as in the one on the left, I do these pieces with text because I want the meaning to be totally accessible. Um, Also, you can express a lot just through the kind of typeface that you use. And this one is the position of the typeface, all the way up to the edge of the piece. It reinforces the meaning of the piece. Um, and this is where I started also. Well, this is an example of when I used a found object, which is that piece of jewelry on the person's ear. Is an actual earring. Lots of my earrings, when I lose one, the other one ends up in one of the pieces. So, and the piece on the right uh, is a piece where you can see me moving into portraiture. One way, two things went into my thought about making this piece. One was the quote itself. That is a quote from Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. I did it in 2015, and it means as much or more today as
Yes.
it did back then. That was after I'd retired, and I decided to catch up on some reading, and I had an opportunity to read some of his work and read more about him. I thought, I've got to do a piece, and that was a quote from him I selected. And then another consideration for my portrait pieces is the person's physicality. He had such an intensity about him that came out in his facial features, and so he was an excellent subject for a portrait piece to go along with his quote. And also, I've done a number of Baldwin pieces with other quotes uh, because he's just so relevant. He'll always be relevant. He's
Yes.
a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant man.
You have an amazing ability to capture life, such lifelike features. I feel like he's about to say something to us. Yeah, and even though you're using, basically a two-color silhouette.
And that to me, that two-color silhouette is what provides the impact for the piece. That's the thing that is arresting about the pieces. Um, you can walk into a room and your eye just kind of turns it to, you know, and if I do a good job, the recognition is immediate. So, and that's part of my art training. But I do have to say that it takes a little, sometimes to make one of these, takes a few stabs at it to get to get the energy right, because a little change in the eyebrows or a little change in the forehead, just the likeness goes away, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. I enjoy. It's a challenge I enjoy. Um, and I've often been asked to teach this, and I'm working on it, but it takes, you know, if you want to take, it takes a little tries to get it right. So this piece is called Transformation. It's 48 inches high and 36 inches wide. I did it in 2010. And in addition to doing portraits, to me, the portraits and this piece are like, you know, it's storytelling, but using the body as a vehicle to tell the story. And the story on this one is that I was getting over the grief from someone that I lost, someone that I cared very much about, that I lost. And I decided that I needed to work it out in a piece. And so that what came of that working it out was this. There's a lot of me in it. The eyes, and this is a storytelling I'm talking about. The eyes are actually photographs of my eyes. And when you look at my pieces, you can tell where you can look back and see, oh, she used that photo transfer stuff to, you know, she worked it into later pieces too. And this is what happens. What you do builds on the next thing you do and builds on the next thing you do. So anyway, the eyes are my eyes, the eyes and the hands, which I consider a personal symbol for the artist, the seeing hand. Those are my eyes also. And I've done a lot of machine embroidery in the body. And what I've done is make the words in the embroidery express, as you, on the bottom of the piece, they express the difficulty of grieving. The words grief, the words pain, that sort of thing. And then as you go up the body, you get words that are more positive. As you transform this experience into growth, you get words like enlightenment, you get words like forgiveness. And it just, that as you move towards the top of this piece, that's what happens. And the detail shows some of the embroidery here. That's enlightenment. And I think even the word this is the end of the word transformation here. And then these little comet pieces, these pieces that are comets, you know, once you've gone through this transformation and growth, you're ready to experience the next challenges that come. And these represent the next challenges. So I've taken something that is just a body and told that entire story. And that really appeals to me. The heart that's portrayed there, that's a velvet heart. And by the way, I've used a lot of different types of materials in this too.
I can see that, yeah.
I've used recycled clothing, commercial cottons, hand-painted fabrics. Those clouds in the piece are, actually I did at the very last, because the piece was totally quilted. And I took almost a dry brush with white paint and painted the clouds in, and the texture of the quilting created a very nice effect.
Wow. That was brave. I can imagine people watching and saying, I was quilted. That was
I
very
just
brave.
did. I just did. And then sometimes, you're flowing with what's coming through you. And that came through me. So it just, sometimes a light goes on and you do it, and I haven't done it since. That was perfect. That was perfect. And I put a lot of emotion into this piece. So it also has metallic leaves, mirrored fabrics, which I love. I love reflective pieces, and then the machine embroidery. My next piece is a portrait called When Mahalia Sings. And this is another, let's see, this is 50 by 50. And I used a lot of that vintage linen that I was talking about in this piece. And this is another example of a person's physicality being part of the impact of the work. The folks who remember her just remember the feeling they had when they heard her sing. And I've had people say, I feel I feel this piece. It's just like she's singing right now. And and again, the two color representation of the face has that high impact. And this is the first time I showed someone's teeth in the piece.
Oh, yes.
And it doesn't look like a cartoon. Okay. And the stained glass situation in the back lets you know that it's a gospel singer. Even if you didn't know who Mahalia was, you would know this is somebody singing, and she was related to the church.
True.
One of my favorite pieces. Other examples of my portraits. The left one, I want to make you aware that I made that during the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, and I needed some color therapy. Sometimes I do it because I need a lift, and generally I use a lot of reds and browns and, earthy tones, but I need a lift. So I made this piece on the left, which is not an individual I know, but I think it's a real boost for, at a time like this. And the portrait on the right is called When Destiny Smiled, and it's actually a portrait of a student named Destiny, a Micah student named Destiny. Sometimes I just want a little joy. I saw a photograph of her and I said, I gotta do a quilt of her. It's the gestures, it's the tilt of the shoulder and the little gap in the teeth. And she didn't have those flowers in her hair, but she should have.
Perfect.
Okay. But you can see the range of effects that you can get from the fabrics and from the fact that it's a portrait. It's not, they all have meaning. This piece is an important piece to me because it was shown at And Still We Rise, which actually in part is still traveling. This piece is still traveling and being shown. And Still We Rise, I think it was 5 years ago when it opened? Can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is a catalog available, I believe, on Amazon, so I'll put a link to it.
Yes, and so this is a reflection of my history as a researcher at the Library of Congress. I went and got articles about Paul Robeson when he played Othello on Broadway in 1944. It was a major accomplishment for him to play with a white cast, and And he would not play in the South where his audiences couldn't be integrated. And so some of those articles in this piece are about that. I even have in this detail, you can even see how much the cost of a ticket was. I think it says $1 if you look at the detail. Oh, so it's also, as you can see, my techniques for using embroidery, mixed fabrics. Also, one thing I did in this one I don't normally do, well, I hadn't done before, was tea dyeing. So to make some of those photos look old and to have some contrast really in the background. So different levels of tea dye. And I love this piece. I love the travels. And that it is, I think it's on the title page of the catalog for And Still We Rise also. And it's also given me an opportunity to have many conversations with Carolyn Mazzoni, which is great bonus.
Yes.
And another example of the emotion that you can create. And this was really, it was like he was in theatrical lighting when the photograph that I took this from or used as a reference. I didn't copy the photograph, I used it as a reference. He was in stage lighting and as that character Othello. And even the necklace, the charm that's around his neck, or the pendant, I painted the letter D in for Desdemona. There's all kinds of messages in his robe.
And I just wanted to point out that the detail photo is an in progress photo.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So you can see how some of that was pieced. Thank you. Yeah, that was before it was all it was all put together and quilted. I think I just wanted people to see that you could go to a Broadway show for $1 back in those days.
Right.
But there's a different dollar.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite pieces. And this is the last piece that I'll show. This is called Black Lives Still Matter. And the dimensions are 65 inches high and 50 inches wide. So this is one of my larger pieces. And I made it back in 2016 when I found out, I was watching TV and I saw Philando Castile just perish right before my eyes. And once again, I felt like I had to do something as an expression of what that did to me, what that is doing to everyone, to the nation, and what it can't do, which is silence us.
Right.
That is why I chose this proverb. Really, it's a Mexican proverb. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. So the message is carried through the stance of the woman in the piece. And one thing I found out later is some people think it's a man. Some people think it's a woman.
Interesting.
I like that. It just depends on the person. But it's carrying the stance of it's carried in the body. The story is carried in that body. Just the way, our stories are carried in our bodies, our Black bodies. And this piece has the names of people, the iconic names. There's no way to even do all the names. There's so many names. Just the iconic names sewn into the piece. And the detail that I chose shows that collage effect in the sleeve where I've sewn in the names, the words Black Lives Matter, and some of the, I think it says, they can't kill us all. something I located in a newspaper. And then images, all these images of growth, all these images of regeneration.
Mhm.
And that's how I pick my colors, and how I pick my imagery that goes into the piece. I start with what's the piece about and what colors and what imagery would reflect that.
Right.
So,
Wow. And when I look at the figure, it takes me back to the 60s and 70s, the protests at that time. So, whatever that is, 70 years ago, 60 years ago, same
Yes.
themes, same struggle.
Absolutely. And this was done several years ago before George Floyd, and
Mhm.
it's being shown, this piece is being shown now in Minneapolis, along with a series of other exhibits that Dr. Carolyn Mazzoni has curated about our struggle. And I would imagine that Carole would be able to put up
Yep, I'll link to that.
a link to that too.
Wow, thank you, Glenda, for sharing the stories behind those pieces, even though I've seen most of them in the past. I still learned a lot more about what goes into making a piece for you. And that's really insightful, it's inspirational. And thank you for opening up about you as an artist and as a woman, as a person. So that's very much appreciated. So I want to close with just a question for you. There are probably people watching this interview who might themselves want to make either a memory quilt or a quilt that has some meaning. Is there a piece of advice you would give them about how to start, where to begin thinking about making a piece of personal meaning?
Wow, that's a good question. First, I would say learn a little bit just about the general basics of quilt making. I was able to do that before I found my community by going to a local quilt shop and taking, I think I've only taken 2 basic quilt classes and that will get you started just with the mechanics of it. The other thing is just to look at your, especially for the memory quilts, I think that's what you were asking about, memory pieces, to look at your family album, to look at other people's family albums. Pick out things that are important to you. It was important to me to document my mother's lineage because that's who I spent most of my summers with when I was a girl. And so I've got my grandmother and my great grandmother, and there's only one picture that we have of my great grandmother. So think about those things that are precious that you want to document, and then look up. And now we can Google.
Yeah.
Look up ways to transfer photographs and documents onto various kinds of fabric. And then use that fabric as you would in any quilt. You can make it, you don't have to layer them the way I did. You can make them the center of a block. You can make it the center of a log cabin, or you can do it you can do it
It's okay.
in a way that is not traditional.
Right.
So those are the steps that I would take, but it starts from what's important to you. Look and see what's important to you. And so that's my advice I would give. And also don't compare yourself to anybody.
Yes.
Do not compare yourself to anybody. This is not a competition. This is a journey. You know, this is a journey of personal growth. That's the way I look at it. So that would be my advice. And be patient. Be patient with yourself. If you keep doing it, you're going to get great results.
Right. Thank you so much. And thank you again for spending this time with me and with the folks who will tune in to watch this interview. There's so much that you said that will inspire and encourage other quilters, other artists, and I'll bet you get a few inquiries
Okay.
about when are you going to start teaching? So, you know, keep thinking about that.
Okay. I'll think about it.
So thanks again, Glenda, and thank you to
Thank you.
everyone who is tuning in. And you have a great rest of your day, Glenda. Enjoy it.
Okay. Okay. I just want to thank you for this opportunity to, Carol. This has been wonderful.
Oh, you are so welcome. All right, everybody, have a great day and see you at the next interview. Bye-bye.